Are you just starting out in chess and want to improve quickly? Look no further than this video where we'll go over the most important tips and tricks that all beginners should know, covering every stage of the game, including the opening, the middle game, and the endgame. So sit back, relax, and get ready to take your chess game to the next level. Let's kick things off with the opening. There are a few main concepts you should focus on during this stage. Number 1 is piece development. Develop your pieces efficiently as it sets up the stage for a strong middle game. You should look to move your pieces towards the center of the chessboard as they exert more control over the board from the central positions. The 4 key center squares in chess are e4, e5, d4, and d5. So we will look to develop our pieces to try and control either one of these 4 squares almost every time. Next, develop your knights and bishops first before the queens and the rook. So an example will look something like this. Let's say we play pawn to e4. The pawn controls the key central square on d5 and also controls the square on f5. Let's say black responds with the same move, pawn to e5, mirroring what we just did. Now, we develop our knight to f3, again controlling one of the center square, attacking the pawn on e5, and here our knight will have many options to jump to later on in the game. Compared to if we develop our knight this way, towards the side of the board, our knight's options are more limited as it can only jump forward this way and this way, compared to if we develop our knight towards the center of the board, which is what we should always aim for. So let's say black responds with knight here, defending his own pawn and also controlling the center of the board. Now we bring out our bishop, for example, bishop here. It's also very important to remember to not move the same piece multiple times in the opening unless it's absolutely necessary. Instead, focus on getting all of your pieces into play. So for example, let's say black plays a move like this. Since we moved our bishop and our knight earlier on, we wouldn't want to move them again the second time. So for example, a move like this will not be good because it violates the principle of moving our piece a second time. However, if our piece were to be under attack, let's say black plays a move like this. Now our bishop is under attack, and of course, we would have to either defend it or retreat it backwards. And in that scenario, it's totally fine to move a piece twice because black has done the same as well, moving his knight 2 times. Number 2, we'll be talking about king safety. So an exposed king is vulnerable to early attacks, which is why it's essential to prioritize king safety in the opening. By developing our knights and our bishops first, we are setting up our position to allow for castling as quickly as possible. So let's say black plays his knight back, and now we can already play the move castling and get our king to safety as soon as possible. The reason why we always aim to castle quickly is because if our king stays in the center of the board, if we continue to develop more and more pieces and open up the position, our king might be vulnerable to checks or attacks from the enemy if it stays at the center of the board. Compared to if we do castling, now our king is tucked into a nice corner on this side of the board, protected by a wall of pawns, and we have plenty of pieces surrounding our king as well. And as a bonus, our rook also manages to hop over, and the rook can be developed on the next move, or we can connect both our rooks once we have finished developing all of our remaining pieces. Generally, in most cases, you should aim to castle within the first 10 moves. Next, we need to talk about the scholar's mate, which is a common trap that can catch most beginners off guard. You need to recognize the 4-move checkmate pattern, which involves moving the queen and the bishop out early to target the weak f2 or f7 squares depending on what color you play. So the scholar mate goes like this: e4, e5, and now white brings out the queen really quickly and aggressive from the start. Although a move like this is violating the principle where we want to develop our knights and bishops first, our minor pieces first before our queens and our rooks, which are our major pieces, but the queen move here actually sets up for a quick win because on the next move, white is looking to play bishop here to c4, targeting the pawn on f7 as well, and since there are no other defenders on the pawn besides the king, the queen will then capture the pawn and give checkmate in just 4 moves. So for example, something like this, and if you're not careful protecting this square and you play a move like knight here, trying to attack the queen, queen takes f7 is just checkmate and game over in 4 quick moves. Some of you might know the scholar's mate and how to checkmate with white using it, and you might even have tried it before in the rear game and succeeded in winning in 4 moves. However, we must also take a look at how do we defend the scholar's mate if we are the opposite color. So now let's take a look from black's perspective. Again, e4, e5, and let's say we are playing black and our queen plays a move like this. We already know that the queen wants to target this pawn over here, but actually the queen is targeting our pawn on e5 first at this point in time because our king still defends our pawn. So if we were to play a careless move like pawn here, trying to block the diagonal of the queen and trying to attack the queen as well, this would be a huge mistake because now our opponent can just capture the pawn on e5 with check, attacking our king, and also winning our rook on the next move. We are forced to block the check, and then white can just capture our rook, and in just 4 moves we already a rook and a pawn down. So instead, usually we defend our pawn with our knight. So we develop our knight this way, piece development, while defending the pawn as well. But here comes the combination for the scholar's mate, which is bishop to c4, threatening checkmate over here. So as we have just seen, a move like knight here doesn't defend the pawn even though it attacks the queen, which is why white can just give checkmate with queen capture. So instead, we have to somehow defend our pawn on f7. A move like pawn to g6 is possible now because the queen cannot capture this pawn as our knight defends it, and it also blocks the queen from attacking the pawn. And any queen move to protect our pawn is fine as well. For example, a move like queen here to e7 or queen to f6. However, just be careful of one additional trick that your opponent might implement, which is after we attack the queen with pawn to g6, white might retreat the queen over here. And it may seem that the attack is over, and a move like knight to d4 is very tempting because we attack the queen and we also threaten to give check, capture the pawn here and give check on his king. But just be careful because again, our pawn is under attack, so all we have to do is just block with the knight. So as long as you recognize the 4-move checkmate pattern and protect your f7 or your f2 square if you're attacking as black, you'll be fine and able to defend against the scholar's mate. But before we proceed to the middle game, if you're finding these tips and tricks helpful, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more chess content. Your support motivates us to keep creating more informative videos for you. As we enter the middle game, it's essential to develop a plan and maintain a balance between attack and defense. And here are some key concepts to focus on during the middle game. Number 1 is pawn structure. A solid pawn structure is the backbone of your position. So for example, in this game, white's pawn structure are set up this way, and similarly, black's pawn structure are set up this way. The reason why pawn structures are so important is if we are looking to attack, if black is looking to attack white's pawn, it's very hard for him to capture white's pawn this way because the pawn on e5 is defended by this pawn, which is defended by this pawn, which is defended by this pawn. So essentially, if black were to attack and go for this pawn on e5 over here, you will need to start from the base or from the root of all the pawns, which is over here, before you can get to the pawn over here. Similarly for black's pawn structure, if white were to want to attack this pawn over here, this pawn is defended by this pawn, which is defended by this pawn, which is defended by this pawn. So we would have to attack the pawn all the way here in order to capture this pawn here, which is why a solid pawn structure like this is really important for the middle game. Try to avoid doubled or isolated pawns as they can become weak targets for your opponent, and we should look to create pawn chains for strength and support of your pieces. So for example, in this position, white can capture the knight with the bishop here with check, black has to capture back this way, and this is called a double pawn. Double pawns are usually considered weak because they cannot support each other, compared to if the pawns were still this way. If this pawn were to move forward, the pawn will be supported by the pawn chain this way, or if the B pawn were to move forward, this pawn will be supported by his other pawns as well, which is why we try to avoid a position where you have double pawns like this. Similarly, for isolated pawns, this set of pawns over here are considered isolated because there are no pawns adjacent or next to them, which is why they cannot be supported. For example, on this side of the board, there are pawns beside each other, so if you move the pawns forward, they're always supported by the adjacent pawns. So that's why try to avoid double pawns as much as possible, because that creates weaknesses in your positions. The next thing to look out for in the middle game are tactics. Tactics are moves that enable you to gain a material advantage over your opponent by exploiting the weaknesses in their position. They are the building blocks of winning positions in the middle game, so keep an eye out for these common tactical motives. The first common tactical motive is a fork or a double attack, which means attacking two or more pieces simultaneously at the same time. So for example here, if it's white to play a move like here, pawn to d5 would be a fork because the pawn creates a double attack on the knight and the bishop, and black is forced to decide which piece should he save, the knight or the bishop, and regardless, black would be a piece down. Forks and double attacks could also be created by the knight. In this case, the knight is attacking the queen and also looking to capture this pawn here on c7. If black were to make a fatal error, for example queen here, now white can play knight takes, and not only the knight gives check, but the knight also attacks the queen and the rook, which would be a triple attack in this case. The next tactical motive to watch out for are pins. A pin occurs when a piece that is under attack is unable to move, because by doing so, it would expose a more valuable piece behind it. So for example, in this case, the black's knight on f6 is being pinned by the white bishop because the knight is tied down to the queen. If the knight were to move anywhere else, the queen would be under attack and the white bishop can just capture the queen. So usually for pins, the attacker exploits the pins by bringing in another piece to attack the knight which is under pin, for example with a move like this. So now the knight is under attack by the pawn and the bishop, and at the same time the knight cannot move away because the queen is under attack. So in this scenario, black would be forced to give up the knight on the next move being captured by the pawn. Even though forks and pins might seem very basic and you might think it's something easy that can be spotted, in a real chess game where there are so many things going on at the same time, it is very easy to lose track of your pieces, which of your pieces are attacking and which pieces are defending. So be very careful. Additionally, a bonus tip is to always be aware of hanging pieces or pieces that are defended, both your own pieces and your opponent's pieces as well. So for example, in this position, the white's knight is not a hanging piece because it's defended by the pawn and the queen. However, the black bishop is a hanging piece because although the bishop threatens a pin, the bishop is actually undefended by himself. So in this position, white can actually play a move like queen to a4, checking the king, and also with a double attack on the bishop over here. Black has to block the check, let's say he does it with the knight, and now white can just capture the bishop and he would be one piece up already. So watch out and be careful of how you use your pieces for attack and defense, and always keep an eye out for hanging vulnerable pieces. Now before we move on to the endgame, it's worth noting that many beginner games don't actually make it that far. This is because games can often be one-sided and end quickly due to mistakes or blunders. However, it's crucial to know how to convert your advantage into a win if you do reach the endgame. So let's explore some essential endgame checkmates to help you secure those victories. The most essential checkmate that you need to know as a beginner is how to checkmate the enemy king with just a king and a queen. However, there are certain positions where you have an extra pawn or a few extra pawns in the endgame, and of course, the easiest way to checkmate your opponent is to promote your pawns and make them into queens so that you have 2 queens, which makes the checkmate way easier. Of course, if you have more additional pawns and you wish to promote into more queens, that's okay as well. However, be very careful because the more amount of queens you have on the board, the easier it is for you to be careless and put black in a stalemate position. So firstly, let's take a look at a powerful checkmating pattern using the ladder method, which can be used in many situations when you have 2 queens, 2 rooks, or a queen and a rook working together. The ladder method is very simple. All we have to do is to cut off the enemy king either horizontally or vertically, and your queens or your rooks or your queen and rook just has to be adjacent to each other. So it will look something like this. For example, black places his king over here. Now we go queen here, cutting off this line so the king can never escape this way. Let's say the king goes here. Now we bring our other queen, giving check. So as you guys can see, both our queens adjacent to each other will now form a ladder where we just have to move it up the board until we reach the end, which would be checkmate. And the ladder method is very easy and efficient because by using our queens or our rooks this way, we cut off 2 lines at the same time, which prevents the enemy king from escaping, and we just have to push the king to one corner or one side of the board. So let's say the king goes here, we give check, ladder method, king goes here, we give check. The king can never escape because we control these 2 lines. Now that the king is on the last square, we just have to slide the queen down again to give checkmate. The only difference with 2 rooks is that with queens, the queens can defend each other because they move diagonally as well, compared to rooks, which only move horizontally and vertically. So now let's compare them if instead of 2 queens, we had 2 rooks. Same concept, we use the ladder method and the rooks are adjacent to each other. The reason why we need the rooks to be adjacent to each other is because if let's say they are on the same file like this, if we give check like here, the king will be able to escape this way because we have no pieces along this file. That's why if our pieces, our rooks or our queens were placed adjacent to each other, we can just slide them down one at a time to give check, and there will be no way for the king to escape. However, the only difference with the rooks and the queens as mentioned earlier is that now let's say the black king goes here, the king attacks our rook, and because we have 2 rooks and not a queen or 2 queens, the rooks do not defend each other in the ladder method. So we cannot give check this way because the black king will just capture our rook. However, it's very easy to continue the ladder method by moving the rook that's under attack all the way across the board towards the other side, far away from the king. This is because if the king were to go back and attack our rook again, it would take a lot of moves. So let's say he tries to be smart and goes this way instead, preventing our check here. Now, same concept, we just have to slide our rook over to the other side, and following the ladder method, now we're cutting off the king this way with our rooks adjacent to each other. The king needs too many moves to get to this side again to protect the squares and attack our rook, so he is already too late and it's already checkmate on the next move itself. And that's a wrap on our beginner's guide to chess, covering essential tips and tricks for the opening, middle game, and the endgame. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more chess content. In the comments below, let us know which stage of the game you find most challenging, the opening, the middle game, or the endgame. Thanks for watching, and we see you in the next video.